are back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your late Monday afternoon into early evening here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. The newest entry in our continuing series of the best movie you've never seen. And this is one hell of a movie. And it is now more than 70 years old, directed by a fantastic filmmaker who later went on to teach at my old alma mater, New York University, although the filmmaker, Nicholas Ray, passed a long time before I ever attended classes at New York University. The film is 1954's very weird Western comedy noir love story, Johnny Guitar. And the star of the film, the nominal star of the film, is the title character of Johnny Guitar. His real name is Logan, but spoiler alert, he plays a mean guitar, hence the title Johnny Guitar. But Sterling Hayden as Johnny Guitar is technically the lead character, but Joan Crawford is in this movie. And for those of you who know anything about Joan Crawford, she was a pretty dominating screen presence. She was an alpha screen presence. And this film gets into some very, for the time, and even now it would be a little bit, what are we doing here? It gets into some pretty serious gender politics. Ooh, I'm going to talk about gender politics. Not really. I'm going to talk about this movie. But the character of Joan Crawford dresses a certain way, looks a certain way. She wears pants like this is the end of the world. She wears pants. Not something that landed with me. She wears pants. She and Johnny Guitar used to be in a relationship, and maybe the issue was that she was the one wearing the pants. Like, all of this stuff is hitting you over the head. It's actually very funny. But then you have a character, Joan Crawford plays Vienna, before I forget. She owns a saloon. She runs basically a nightclub, a bar, and like a casino. And Mercedes McCambridge, who later gained fame as the demon Pazuzu, she's the voice of the demon in The Exorcist. Well, this is about 20 years prior. She plays a woman named Emma who has I don't know if she has a crush on Vienna or she just wants to kill her. It seems as if she wants both. She wants she wants Vienna for herself physically, but she hates her guts. It's that kind of, obsessive love-hate kind of situation. And you have a number of really interesting actors and one big star and future Oscar winner, right around this time frame, in fact, in Ernest Borgnine, who is one of the supporting actors. But there's a character in this film who goes by the Dancing Kid. And I don't know that he has a name other than the Dancing Kid. And just like Johnny Guitar plays the guitar, the Dancing Kid likes to dance. He's the Dancing Kid. So, into all of this madness, you have a character called McIvers, who is played by a great old actor and a close friend of John Wayne named Ward Bond. Another great name in real life, Ward Bond. And he's like a landowner, land baron type. And the Dancing Kid is accused and suspected of like a number of crimes. And he doesn't really seem like the type. He doesn't seem like the murdering kind. But there are all of these different threads of plot that were already taking place, that the kind of seeds had been planted before we meet our main character, or at least our theoretical main character of Johnny Guitar. And so he steps into this very combustible situation where Emma wants to kill Vienna, or maybe she just wants to hook up with her, or maybe she wants to hook up with her and then kill her. I don't know. McIvers, the land baron type guy, is convinced that the Dancing Kid is a thief and a murderer. And Johnny Guitar, maybe he just wants Joan Crawford's Vienna back. This film has an incredible scene early on where surface level it's about one thing, but it's really about something else entirely. And I remember seeing this movie. We screened it at NYU, not surprisingly, in the class called The Western. It was my final semester. My last semester academically was fall 1996. It was quite some time ago. And I had heard of this movie, but I knew nothing about it. I didn't even know that it was a Western. I just knew, Nicholas Ray, he made a lot of, did he do Rebel Without a Cause? I don't even remember, but I know he did other big movies, bigger films historically than Johnny Guitar. So there's a scene early in the film after Johnny Guitar has kind of shown up at Vienna's saloon. And he doesn't know anyone there except her. We don't know enough about him to know, is he going to side with the land baron rancher guy, or is he going to side with potentially the thieves and the murderous gang led by the Dancing Kid? And so these different factions are barking at each other, and it looks like there's going to be a fight, when all of a sudden, here comes Johnny Guitar to the rescue. I don't know that you could say to the rescue, but he comes on the scene and basically insults everyone in the bar with the exception of Joan Crawford. But by doing so, he diffuses the tension. And he establishes himself. He just comes across like someone who is very confident that he can handle any situation that may arise. He asks Ward Bond for a smoke. And Ward Bond, although he always has a puss like he's angry, he obliges. He doesn't know this gentleman. He gives him a cigarette. Then he walks over to the Dancing Kid. Can I trouble you for a light? Gives him a light. So he's kind of making nice with the two opposable, the movable force meets the irresistible object. He's trying to make nice with everybody while he also has insulted them and will continue to do so. And then he has an interesting conversation with the so-called Dancing Kid. And not surprisingly, you've got a guitar player and a Dancing Kid, and suddenly we go into musical territory where Johnny Guitar plays his guitar, and a Dancing Kid starts dancing around with the Mercedes McCambridge character of Emma. Now, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at watching the movie, but during that entire scene of first Johnny Guitar insulting and then trying to get along, but just sort of sticking his nose where it probably doesn't belong. But as that is going on, and then it turns into this musical scene, which is so absurd, the audience, everyone in the class, my memory is that almost everyone was giggling and laughing because we couldn't believe what we were seeing. Like, this is not, what is this? Is this a Western? Is this a musical? Is this a comedy? What are we watching here? Are there going to be any gunfights? So the actor who plays the Dancing Kid is kind of interesting from a historical perspective. His name is Scott Brady. And Scott Brady appeared in a movie that many of you have seen. He plays the sheriff in the original Gremlins. He was an older actor at that point. But Scott Brady was a star. He was a kind of actor. He would headline B films, movies that didn't have very big budgets and which were mostly shot on studio sets. But then in A films, he would be a secondary supporting player. It's not really that unusual. You had guys like Walter Brennan who made careers out of doing what I just said. But Scott Brady, in the right around the time of this movie, it may have been a year or so later, 56, Scott Brady made a movie called Ambush at Cimarron Pass. And the only reason why that film is also a Western is notable because of a young supporting actor kind of jockeying for screen time in that film, Clint Eastwood. It was one of Eastwood's first roles that was more than a cameo. I believe at the time he was a contract player with Universal. He had yet to get Rawhide, but he was getting close. Rawhide was right in front of him, and he was about to become a big TV star before obviously becoming a big movie star. But so the actors in this film, they all had some level of success in the movie business. But what Johnny Guitar also does, despite the weird gender roles and the strange ideology, which is this intentional? What are they trying to say here? Is Nicholas Ray making a larger point about society with the way that Vienna is dressed and Emma dressing in black, and she's not a gunfighter, and there's so much going on if you pay attention to this stuff. And in film school, this is what we did. We were looking for larger meanings. They didn't just randomly show us entertaining films. We were supposed to see how these movies were reflecting culture, were speaking on the United States circa mid-1950s and social issues of the day. The Red Scare was taking place. None of these things happen in a vacuum. The choice of clothing for the female leads, the way that Sterling Hayden's Johnny Guitar, he's the title character, but he doesn't do anything. That's something that you don't see. He's supposed to be driving the action. He's the male lead, but the movie belongs to the female leads. He more or less stands around observing for 90% of the movie, and he has one heroic act. He saves Vienna. He saves Vienna at one point late in the film. But other than that, he just mostly sits around doing nothing, twiddling his thumbs, playing his guitar, drinking coffee, and he has an interesting dynamic with the dancing kid because they're not really friends, but they're also not really enemies. And Ernest Borgnine, who ended up winning an Oscar a year later for the movie Marty, which it hasn't necessarily aged that well, but it is a good movie. And Borgnine, he did not have leading man looks. I've mentioned how there are certain actors that had big careers, such as Roy Scheider, Charles Bronson, Dustin Hoffman, without necessarily having leading man looks. Ernest Borgnine was in that category. Ernest Borgnine looked like a regular person. He did not in any way look like a movie star. And he plays one of the secondary kind of antagonists. And Borgnine usually played good guys. He played more good guys than bad, especially in this era of the movie Marty. In movie Marty, he plays a Bronx butcher whose mom keeps telling him he needs to get married, but he is not an attractive guy. So the fact that he has some money, that he's a butcher and he makes a decent living and he has some savings, if it were as easy as all of that, nobody would have the existential crises and the woe is me moments that the character of Marty has. But it just showed that Ernest Borgnine was an actor of enormous versatility and range because he did comedy, he did drama, and he played his share of heavies, and then war movies such as The Dirty Dozen in the 60s, where he plays a sympathetic general in that film. And in one of the most famous Westerns, a groundbreaking Western in its way, The Wild Bunch, the Sam Peckinpah film, where he's pretty much, he and Warren Oates are the right-hand men of William Holden's Pike, the main character in that film. But this is unlike any other Western because of the almost complete inaction of its hero. I mean, try to imagine the movie Unforgiven, which sets up, William Money is going to go with the Morgan Freeman character, and Ned is the name of the character, and Schofield Kid. And they have to go and they're going to try to collect a bounty. They're going to attempt to bump off these two cowboys, well, one of whom assaulted a woman, but they're just going to kill the cowboys anyway. And you make that movie, and it turns out that William Money doesn't do anything. He just accompanies the other two guys, Ned and Schofield Kid, on the quest, and he kind of comments on the action, and he watches what's happening, but he doesn't do anything. I don't know if the lack of activity of Johnny Guitar was supposed to be making any point about society. If it was, I have no idea what that might be. I think it was just a very unconventional way to tell a story, because there are the trappings of a regular Western. If you just look at the story from a broad sense, well, what happens in this film? You have a bit of a land war. You have young men under suspicion of multiple crimes, and maybe there's no way they can prove they didn't do it. This is not really a criminal justice system of even the 20th century. This is old school justice, and well, I think you did it, and I'm going to shoot you. And it has that, and then it has this strange, maybe doomed romance between Johnny Guitar and the Joan Crawford character of Vienna. And the interesting thing, on top of everything else, because Nicholas Ray was very canny, so despite the way that he dresses Joan Crawford, the way that she comes across, and how tough she is, and how she is for sure an alpha female. She doesn't want anybody coming into her bar telling her what to do, or you have to do this, hey, fuck you. she has a little bit, well, Karen Allen in Raiders of the Lost Ark has a little bit of the edge as far as nobody comes into my bar and tells me what to do. Well, in the world of that film, spoiler alert, Tote and his men kind of have their way until Indiana Jones rescues. But in this movie, we get the sense that Joan Crawford is respected. Even there are people who don't like her, but when she says knock it off, even the Ward Bond character is going to listen to her. And the interesting thing is that, and maybe this isn't something that you would have necessarily thought about, but they are, after all, just actors. They're regular people. And me watching this film, if I was asked, who's the bad guy? I said, well, there really isn't a conventional bad guy among the primary cast. I said, but the Ward Bond characters, he's really an asshole because he thinks it's a his way or the highway. And he thinks, presumably because he's got land and a lot of money, everybody must bend to my will. Fuck y'all. Screw you. So I saw him as not a good guy. Like this is as close to a antagonistic force that Johnny Guitar will deal with, but he can handle him by himself without any trouble. This guy isn't so tough. But I read an interview with Ward Bond. He thought his character was the good guy. He thought his character was the good guy. So that's where you get into what we as the audience bring to the film. And there are no doubt going to be people watching this or people who have watched this, and there's certainly a lot of academic study on the film Johnny Guitar, who look at the character of Emma, the Mercedes McCambridge character, as more of a tragic character or an anti-hero as opposed to a truly villainous character. It's what you think. It's how you perceive the world. You're going to filter your own perception of the movie based on that. This is kind of film school 101 level stuff. But what I was saying about Joan and how she is framed. Yes, she's tough, she's hardcore, she wears pants, but there are moments in the film where she is allowed to come across as a conventional leading lady. And there is a bit of a risque shot for the day where she's getting undressed and she literally takes her pants off, revealing normal nighttime, almost lingerie of the day clothing. And this was not an accident. This was the director kind of showing off that his star was still hot, I think, but also that for all of the tough talk, she wanted to be loved. She didn't want to be a badass all the time. She didn't want there to be blood spilled in her bar. She kind of wanted people to work out their differences, and if you're going to fight, do it somewhere else. Don't mess up my bar, Now, I didn't end up writing a paper on this movie in that class called The Western. I wrote a paper, not surprisingly, on Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. Because of course I did, because I'm, one of the world's biggest Clint Eastwood fans. But Johnny Guitar is it's an important movie. It, to me, rises to the level of a great film. And my sense is that it's not as widely seen as it should be. That this is a movie that you can really not so much learn a lot from, but you can understand that when people have arguments, and there's nothing wrong with these kinds of arguments, but when people debate Hollywood, quote unquote, when people say things and wonder, could this movie be made now? Or, would somebody say, we can't do this? This is a film in Johnny Guitar that was made 70 years ago. And there were people arguing about whether or not it should have been made. And Nicholas Ray was clever in the way that he camouflaged certain elements of what he was really going for and all of that. But it's not really a product of its time because the film is set in the late 19th century and it's made in the mid 1950s. But it's a product of its time as far as paranoia and questions of does might make right. And in the case of the character of McIvers, Ward Bond, the real actor, felt that this guy should have been allowed to do what he wanted simply because he had a lot of money and a lot of land. And the movie gives you an awful lot to chew on when when it comes to a conclusion. And yeah, it has a lot of laughs. Sterling Hayden is just a naturally entertaining actor. He had a tendency to be a little hammy. Kubrick took full advantage of that in, Dr. Strangelove several years later, as the general who kind of goes off loses his marbles. But the film is exceedingly well acted. The musical interludes work. And even if it's not necessarily that exciting from the action perspective, it's just a terrific film. And I don't know anybody who has seen it who does not like it. It is immensely enjoyable from the beginning to end. You really don't know how it's going to turn out, in part because Johnny Guitar does so little narratively. He's in so many scenes, but he doesn't take the actions that you expect from a protagonist. Now, before I started this episode, I looked up on the Just Watch, it's not an app, it's a site, to see if there are any streamers that have this movie for free. And right now, I don't think that it's free anywhere on streaming. So as usual, you'd have to pay a couple of bucks on Amazon Prime. But if you really want to see a crazy, cockeyed Western musical noir love story that's now more than 70 years old, you could do worse than Nicholas Ray's 1954 classic, Johnny Guitar, the newest entry in our ongoing series of the best movie you've never seen. This has been episode 443 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your now early Monday evening here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.